On a freezing Vermont night, a war-scarred veteran sat in his truck, wondering how much more life he was meant to endure. Beside him, his loyal dog pressed its head to his shoulder, as if reminding him he wasn't alone. Then came the letter, a trembling spark of hope in his tired, calloused hands. His late aunt had left him a winter lodge by the lake, but when he arrived, the lights were on, footprints cut through the snow, and a stranger had already changed the locks, living in his inheritance like he'd never existed. What followed wasn't just a fight for a home, but a battle for justice, redemption, and a wounded soldier's last chance to heal. If this opening touched you, tell me where you're watching from, and follow for more stories of courage, faith, and second chances. Winter settled over Burlington with a heavy, muted stillness, softening every sound beneath thick waves of snow. The air was sharp enough to sting exposed skin, and the sky hovered low and pale, as if the clouds themselves had grown weary. In the mobile home park near the edge of town, wind curled through narrow lanes, tapping against metal siding and rattling loose gutters. It was an ordinary Vermont evening in January, but for Daniel Brooks, it carried the weight of another memory he hadn't quite outrun. He stepped into his small mobile home with the exhausted slump of a man who had spent hours hauling crates in a cold storage warehouse. His breath still held the bite of sub-zero air, and wisps of frost clung to his beard. The home was dim, warmed only by the old electric heater humming in the corner. But the moment Daniel crossed the threshold, the familiar thump of paws greeted him. Max burst forward, a 5-year-old German Shepherd mix, sturdy but soft-eyed, with a sable coat that glimmered under the kitchen light. One ear bent slightly forward, giving him a perpetually curious look. The dog pressed against Daniel's leg with gentle insistence, sensing the tightness in his shoulders before Daniel even acknowledged it. "Good boy," Daniel whispered, kneeling to rub Max's chest. The contact grounded him, pulling his mind away from the echoes that followed him home. The warehouse had been especially rough that day, pallets stacked too high, machinery clanging against metal racks, a dropped crate thundering against the floor, loud enough that Daniel's breath stalled mid-chest, his brain flicking back to a sand-choked road overseas, where sudden noises never meant something harmless. His left shoulder ached now as he rolled it. It always did after long shifts, scar tissue tugging from an injury that never fully healed after the blast. He shed his jacket, hung it over the chair, and drew in a slow breath. Outside, snow continued drifting down, glazing the windows until the night blurred white. Inside, the heater clicked, Max sighed deeply, and the world felt temporarily safe. Then Daniel saw it, an envelope on the kitchen table he was certain hadn't been there that morning. He paused, brow tightening. The envelope was pristine, starkly white, with a blue-inked address written in elegant script. He picked it up slowly. The return address belonged to a law office in Montpelier. His heartbeat gave a stiff, involuntary kick. People like him didn't receive letters from attorneys unless something had gone wrong. Max sensed the shift immediately. He nudged Daniel's leg, tail lowering just slightly, as if bracing for the tension radiating from his human. "It's all right," Daniel murmured, though he wasn't sure it was. He sat, the old wooden chair creaking beneath him, and slid a calloused thumb beneath the envelope flap. The letter unfolded neatly into his hands. "Dear Mr. Brooks, we extend our condolences regarding the passing of Ms. Eleanor Whitmore. As named in her will, you are the sole inheritor of her lakeside lodge on Lake Willoughby. Please contact our office to discuss estate transfer. Respectfully, Larkin and Bell, attorneys at law." Daniel blinked slowly. The words remained the same, no matter how many times he read them. Eleanor Whitmore. He hadn't said that name aloud in years, not by blood, but by bond. Eleanor had been the one steady thread connecting him to Vermont when he was deployed. A woman with soft silver hair and warm eyes, who wrote him long, thoughtful letters during the darkest stretches of his service. She always chose beautiful stationery, pressed flowers, watercolor borders, neat handwriting that belonged to another era. Her letters never asked for stories he didn't want to tell. She didn't pry or demand details from the field. She simply reminded him that someone out there believed he wasn't beyond saving. He remembered one night after losing a close friend overseas. He had opened one of her letters by the dim glow of a tent lantern. She'd written, "Even winter finds a way to thaw. You will too, Daniel. Trust that your heart knows where home is, even when your mind cannot see it." That letter had kept him breathing through a night that felt impossible. Max nudged Daniel's knee again, looking up with eyes that held patience, an instinctive gentleness shaped through months of learning Daniel's rhythms. Max always knew when the memories turned sharp, when Daniel's pulse kicked too fast, when noise from outside sent his mind spiraling into places he didn't want to revisit. The dog rested his chin on Daniel's thigh now, steady and warm, pulling Daniel back into the present. "She's gone," Daniel murmured, voice thick. "I should have written more. I should have visited." Guilt pricked at him like cold needles. He had withdrawn after returning from service, burying himself in work and solitude. Even opening mail felt like a task some days. But Eleanor had never stopped sending kind words, not once. And now she had left him a lodge, a lakefront lodge on Willoughby. He tried to picture it. He'd never been there, but Eleanor had described it once in a letter. She wrote of winter mornings when the lake froze into a mirror of glass sky, of pines bending beneath crystalline snow, of a cabin porch where she drank tea and watched fox tracks appear like little stories across the drifts. Her descriptions had felt like warmth in a world where warmth was scarce. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. The idea of owning such a place felt surreal, like something meant for a different kind of man. A man less bruised, less solitary. "A lodge by the lake, Max," he whispered. "What do you think of that?" Max barked once, soft but optimistic, as if offering consent to a journey that neither of them yet understood. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the heater buzzing softly as snow. Thickened outside. His mobile home was cramped, his job unstable, his nights fragmented by sleep he could never fully trust. But for the first time in a long while, something unfamiliar curled into his chest, something fragile, tentative, possibility, a direction, a door opening where he thought only walls remained. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. His fingers lingered there, tracing the edge, grounding himself in the unexpected truth of it. Tomorrow, he would call the attorneys. Tomorrow, he would ask what steps were needed. Tomorrow, life might shift, just enough to breathe differently. But tonight, as Max rested against his leg and the winter wind brushed cold hands against the windows, Daniel allowed himself a small, quiet moment of hope. He didn't know what waited at Lake Willoughby. He didn't know what Eleanor meant him to find there, but he knew one thing. For the first time in many years, winter didn't feel like something meant to bury him. It felt like something offering him a way forward. Morning light barely pierced the gray curtain of snowfall drifting over Burlington, its soft weight muffling every sound in the mobile home park. Daniel stood near the counter, boots half-laced, phone in hand. The heater hummed in the corner, trying and failing to erase the bite of winter seeping through thin walls. Max sat alert beside him, tail sweeping the floor in slow, patient strokes, as if waiting for Daniel's next move. The letter from Larkin and Bell lay open again on the table, unchanged yet somehow heavier. It was strange how words on paper could feel like both a blessing and a warning. Daniel dialed the number printed at the bottom, steadying his breath as the line clicked. "Larkin and Bell, how may I assist you?" a receptionist asked. "This is Daniel Brooks," he said. I received notice about Ms. Whitmore's estate. I need to speak with Attorney Larkin." After a brief transfer, a calm voice filtered through the speaker, professional, deliberate. "Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry for your loss. Eleanor spoke highly of you." Daniel swallowed. "Thank you. I'm calling because of the lodge." "Yes," Larkin said, tone shifting with cautious weight. "I'm afraid the situation has become more complicated than we initially realized." Daniel's shoulders tightened. Max lifted his head, sensing the change. "A man named Travis Clark arrived at the property 2 days ago, claiming familial connection. He provided documentation establishing distant relation, second cousin once removed, and stated that Ms. Whitmore verbally promised he would inherit the lodge. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Verbal promises don't override a legal will. Correct, the attorney replied. However, under Vermont estate law, during an active dispute, a relative may be granted temporary custodial oversight. It's not ownership, but it does allow him access to the property. Access? Daniel repeated. What has he done? We've received reports from a neighbor that he has moved several interior items, possibly discarding or selling some. We cannot confirm intent, but I advise documenting everything the moment you arrive. And Mr. Brooks, avoid confrontation. Let the law work in your favor. Daniel nodded slowly, though the weight inside him pressed deeper. He thanked the attorney, ended the call, and stared at the frost gathering along the window edge. Something that had felt like a fragile lifeline last night now trembled in his hands. He wasn't angry so much as stunned. He had barely dared believe the lodge existed for him, and already someone else was claiming it. Max nudged his knee gently. Daniel knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to the dog's, letting the warmth pull him back into his body. "Looks like we've got a drive ahead of us, buddy," he murmured. He packed lightly, 2 changes of clothes, a thermos, a spare blanket, a folder containing the will, and Max's food. Last, he reached for his old army jacket. It had hung untouched for years, frayed around the cuffs, its sandy green fibers holding the faint memory of sun and dust. He didn't like the man he had been in that jacket, but today he needed its weight. A reminder he had survived far worse than legal disputes and opportunistic relatives. The storm thickened as they stepped outside. Snow stung his cheeks, swirling under the glow of street lamps. Max bounded through it with purposeful steps, ears perked, nose testing the air. Daniel started the truck, waited for the rumbling engine to warm, then pulled out of the park and onto the long road north. The drive wound through miles of forest, the trees bending under winter's heavy hand. Tires skidded occasionally on hidden ice, jerking the wheel hard enough that Daniel's pulse leaped. Each sudden slip pulled at something buried inside him, shards of memory, a Humvee jolting sideways, dust swallowing sunlight, shouts drowned in ringing silence. He gripped the steering wheel too tightly, breath thinning, vision narrowing. Max sensed the shift immediately. The dog leaned over, resting his head on Daniel's arm with quiet insistence. Daniel exhaled, long and shaky. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm okay. Stay with me." Max didn't move until the road leveled again. As they reached the higher passes, the lake finally revealed itself. Lake Willoughby, vast and serene even in a storm. Its frozen surface stretched beneath pale sky like a sheet of steel. Pines flanked the shoreline, their branches heavy with snow, leaning inward as if guarding the quiet world below. There, tucked between the trees, stood the lodge. Daniel slowed the truck to a crawl. It was larger than he expected, timber walls darkened by years, a wraparound porch cradling the house, windows that looked toward the frozen water like tired eyes. Smoke drifted in a thin ribbon from the chimney. Someone was very much inside. His heart tightened. Max hopped out first, landing softly, his breath forming clouds in the air. Daniel followed, boots crunching into snow. The cold bit through his jacket as he climbed the porch steps. Before he could knock, the front curtain shifted. A shadow moved. The door opened. Travis filled the frame, tall, lanky, in his late 40s, with sandy hair that had thinned since Daniel last saw him. A patchy beard coated his jaw, and deep lines etched his forehead in a way that spoke of hard living and harder choices. His pale blue eyes held the same restless edge he'd had as a younger man, always watching for angles, opportunities. "Well, look who the storm dragged in," he drawled. Daniel kept his voice even. "Travis? Thought I heard a truck." Travis leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, posture loose but eyes sharp. "Didn't think you'd show up so fast. Must be real attached to this place already." "I came to see my aunt's property," Daniel said, "and to document it." "That's so?" Travis smirked. "Funny thing, Eleanor told me plenty of times that this place'd be mine. Guess she forgot to jot that part down for you." Daniel felt Max press against his leg, a steadying weight. "Whatever she told you," Daniel replied quietly, "the will is clear." "Sure," Travis shrugged. "Paperwork is paperwork, but until the lawyers finish their dance, I'm the one holding the keys." He dangled them with a casual flick of his wrist, metal chiming, a symbolic gesture, sharp, territorial. A dozen responses rose in Daniel's chest: anger, challenge, fear of losing the one good thing he'd dared hope for. But years of discipline held him steady. "I'm coming inside," Daniel said, meeting his eyes. "That's the law." A beat. Travis's smirk faltered, replaced by something assessing. Then he stepped back with exaggerated hospitality. "Fine, but keep the mud off the rugs." Daniel stepped into warmth, tinged with wood smoke, Max at his heel. The lodge interior was beautiful, even through its current disarray. Pine walls, stone fireplace, old photographs lining the mantel. But boxes were stacked haphazardly. Furniture had been dragged, items sorted into piles labeled with masking tape. Some were marked keep, others sell. Something inside him sank. He imagined Eleanor here, her soft voice, her careful hands, her letters written in a chair by the window overlooking the lake, and he imagined someone tearing it apart without understanding a single thing she cherished. Max nudged his hand again. The message was simple: "You're not alone." Daniel drew a breath. This place wasn't Travis's, and Daniel wasn't the same man who used to back down. Whatever came next, he would face it. For Eleanor, for himself, for the first real chance at rebuilding a life he wasn't ready to give up on. Snowfall thinned as Daniel followed the winding road into Westmore, the small lakeside town nearest the lodge. Evening had settled early, casting a muted blue glow across shuttered storefronts and quiet streets. Winter here lived differently than in Burlington. It pressed itself into the bones of the town, slowing life to a steady, breathless rhythm. Only one building stood lit against the cold, a small diner with fogged windows and a neon sign faintly buzzing against the storm. Daniel parked outside, the truck engine ticking softly as it cooled. Max hopped out first, landing in a drift of snow with a brisk shake. Warm light spilled from the diner's door as Daniel stepped inside, bringing with it a faint scent of coffee, butter, and wood smoke. The place was nearly empty, save for a single waitress and an older woman behind the counter. She looked up from refilling a sugar jar, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully before widening with recognition, not of him, but of something in his expression. "You're a Brooks," she said, setting the jar down. Her voice was sturdy, textured by years and winter air. She wore a knitted burgundy sweater and an apron flour-dusted at the hem. Her hair, white streaked with stubborn gray, was twisted into a loose bun. "No, wait, Eleanor's boy, Daniel, right? Lord, she talked about you." Daniel blinked, taken aback by the immediate warmth. "You knew her?" "Knew her?" The woman scoffed fondly. "Honey, this town practically ran on her kindness. I'm Carol. I own this place. Sit down before you freeze solid." Daniel obeyed, taking a seat at the counter. Max lay obediently at his feet, surveying the room with calm, steady eyes. Carol slid a mug of steaming coffee toward him. "No charge," she said. "Eleanor would smack me with a menu if I charged her favorite soldier." A small, surprised laugh escaped Daniel. "She always signed her letters like she was gently scolding me." "That she did." Carol leaned against the counter, studying him more closely. "She was proud of you, you know. Told everyone she had a nephew who'd been through hell but still had a heart that pointed in the right direction." Daniel's throat tightened. "I didn't visit as much as I should have." "War changes how folks walk through the world," Carol said gently. She understood that, better than most. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Carol refilled the coffee pot and lowered her voice. "Word's gotten around about that cousin of yours, Travis. Never liked the kid. Always 2 steps away from trouble. Eleanor let him do odd jobs around the place when he was young, but she stopped after he stole from a neighbor's shed. Daniel frowned. She never told me that. She didn't want to sour you on family, but sweetheart. Carol sighed. If she left that lodge to you, she meant it. Travis claiming she promised it verbally? That's the biggest pile of nonsense since Phil Turner said he saw a moose wearing a scarf. Despite everything, Daniel cracked a small smile. Carol leaned in conspiratorially. There's someone you should meet. Tobias Reed. Worked with Eleanor for years. Watched over the lodge when she got too old to climb the back stairs. If anyone knows what she intended, it's him. As if summoned, the bell above the diner door jingled softly. A tall man stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. His shoulders were broad beneath a wool coat, and his graying beard framed a face both rugged and kind. His eyes, pale blue, sharp yet weary, scanned the room before settling on Daniel. "That him?" he asked Carol. She nodded. "That's the one." Tobias walked over with a slow, deliberate gait, the kind of movement that suggested past injuries he'd learned to carry without complaint. He extended a calloused hand. "You must be Daniel Brooks," he said. "Eleanor talked about you like you were her own. I'm Tobias. Looked after the place when she couldn't." Daniel shook his hand. "I appreciate you meeting me." Tobias glanced down as Max approached politely for inspection. The older man crouched, giving Max a respectful pat. "Good dog, steady eyes. Dogs have always been honest judges of character." He rose again and motioned toward the door. "Come on, I want to show you something." They walked out into the night. The storm had softened into a quiet drift, the air sharp and clean. Tobias led him down a narrow path behind the diner, toward the lake trail. Pines rose on either side, dark silhouettes swaying against the wind. "You grew up here?" Daniel asked. "Most of my life," Tobias replied. "Served a few years in the Navy, hurt my knee, came home. Eleanor hired me to do upkeep, mend rails, clear paths, stack wood. She had a bad hip by then, but she never stopped walking these woods. Said the trees remembered kindness." Daniel smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." They reached a small overlook where the lake stretched below, frozen, silent, a pale mirror reflecting a sky full of drifting snow. Across the icy expanse, the lodge glowed faintly, its windows lit like warm lanterns in the dark. "There," Tobias said, pointing. "You're home. Eleanor always said it'd go to you." Daniel exhaled shakily. "She never told me that. She wanted it to be a surprise. Said soldiers like you don't get enough good surprises." Tobias's voice softened. "When she got really sick, she gave me an old metal box, told me it held a spare key and some things for when Daniel comes home." Her words. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The cold pressed against his cheeks, but something warm pressed deeper in his chest. "Do you still have it?" Tobias nodded. "Kept it safe in my workshop. Wouldn't trust Travis with an empty coffee can, let alone something Eleanor valued." They stood quietly a moment, watching the distant lodge. Max sat between them, ears alert, gaze fixed on the house with almost human awareness. "There's more you need to know," Tobias said after a pause. "Travis showed up the day after Eleanor passed, told the town she'd promised him the place. Folks didn't buy it, but legally, he found a loophole, and he's been selling off small things, old lamps, framed photos, tools. Says it's to help maintain the property. But Eleanor's things..." Tobias's jaw clenched. She deserved better. Daniel swallowed the rising anger. "I'll fight it legally." "I know you will," Tobias said. "You've got her spirit, quiet but stubborn where it counts." They turned to head back, snow crunching beneath their boots. As they reached the edge of town, Tobias rested a hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder. "Come by tomorrow," he said. "I'll give you the box. Whatever Eleanor wanted you to have, it's yours. Always was." Daniel nodded, gratitude thick in his throat. Max leaned against his leg, as if echoing that same reassurance. For the first time since seeing Travis at the lodge, Daniel felt the ground beneath him steady. He wasn't alone in this fight. and Eleanor's town still remembered, still cared, still believed in the man she left the lodge to. The storm thinned by morning, leaving the town wrapped in a pale stillness that clung to every pine and rooftop. Daniel met Tobias near the trailhead that led toward the lodge, both men bundled against the sharp Vermont cold. Frost curled through the air with every breath. Max trotted ahead, alert and eager, nose dipping into snowdrifts as if the world itself were whispering secrets for him to find. Daniel had wanted to confront Travis immediately, but Tobias urged caution. "You don't go headfirst into a fire until you know where it's burning," the older man warned. "Let's walk the land first. Eleanor wanted you to understand this place." They followed a narrow path through the trees. The forest was quiet. Too quiet in a way that made Daniel's mind flash back to desert nights when silence felt like a trap. But Max stayed close, brushing Daniel's leg occasionally, reminding him this was now, not then. "There's something I didn't mention last night," Tobias said, his boots crunching through crusted snow. Eleanor kept a storage shed out back, old things she didn't want to part with, tools, journals, keepsakes. "I always suspected she left something for you in there too, but she never said it directly." Daniel nodded. She was like that. She liked people discovering things in their own time. Max suddenly stopped ahead of them, nose pressed deep into a snowbank. His tail lowered, ears pricking sharply. He took a few steps toward a small wooden structure, half buried under drifting snow. "That'd be the shed," Tobias murmured. "Haven't had reason to open it since before Eleanor passed." The building leaned slightly to the right, its planks weathered to a grayish brown. Snow pressed against its sides like a slow, inevitable tide. A rusting padlock hung on the door, nearly hidden under ice. The place felt untouched, forgotten even, like a pocket of memory sealed away by winter. Max pawed at the base of the door and whined softly. "He's onto something," Daniel said, crouching to examine the threshold. "Maybe a scent he recognizes." "Smart dog," Tobias said with admiration. "Eleanor always said animals see truth faster than people." Tobias chipped away the ice with a utility knife and fitted an old key from his ring into the lock. It stuck at first, protesting years of stillness, then gave way with a harsh metallic click. The smell of aged wood, dust, and faint lavender drifted out as the door creaked open. Inside, the shed was dim but orderly. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with jars of nails, fishing gear, woodworking tools, gardening gloves, stiff with disuse. Boxes were stacked in uneven columns, some marked with Eleanor's handwriting, elegant, looping cursive that Daniel recognized instantly. A soft ache bloomed in his chest. "She spent a lot of time here, didn't she?" he whispered. Tobias nodded. "More than she let on. After her hip got worse, she'd sit on that old stool over there and sort through things. Said it helped her feel anchored." Daniel stepped inside, running his hand over a wooden workbench smoothed by years of use. Max followed, weaving between boxes with careful steps, nose twitching rapidly. Then he stopped near a cluster of cardboard boxes in the corner. Daniel approached, heart thudding in quiet anticipation. One box was labeled simply, "For D. Brooks." Tobias drew a slow breath. "Well, She did prepare something." Daniel knelt and lifted the lid. Inside were several items wrapped in cloth. An old brass lantern, polished lovingly, a stack of journals bound with twine, and a folded quilt patterned with pine trees and winter stars. He removed the top journal and opened it gently. On the first page was Eleanor's handwriting, soft, looping, familiar. "If Daniel returns, let him carry the light another season." His throat tightened. She really meant for me to have this place, not just legally, in her heart. "There's more," Tobias said, pulling out a brown leather ledger from the box beside them. This looks like her maintenance log." He opened it to the final entry, written just months before Eleanor's passing. The handwriting trembled slightly but remained precise. "Should Daniel come home, give him whatever guidance these pages hold. He deserves a place that keeps him warm. The words struck Daniel with quiet force, not because they bestowed ownership, but because they revealed intention. Eleanor had been thinking about him long before he realized he needed a home. Max rested his chin on Daniel's knee, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Daniel brushed his fingers over the lantern, feeling its weight. This was hers? Used it every winter? Tobias said. Said light mattered more when days grew short. Daniel swallowed. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. No one's ever really ready for the good things, Tobias replied gently. We're only ever ready for the trouble. A brittle laugh escaped Daniel. Tobias's words felt too true. Max suddenly turned toward the window of the shed and let out a low, warning growl. Daniel stiffened and followed his gaze. Footprints, fresh, maybe only minutes old, cut a messy path through the snow near the tree line. Travis? Daniel asked quietly. Could be, Tobias said. He hangs around, likes to make sure the folks know he's in charge. Daniel felt a flicker of something hot beneath his ribs. Not anger, resolve. He wasn't here to fight, but he wouldn't be pushed away either. If he saw us here, Tobias continued, he'll know you're claiming what Eleanor left for you. I'm not claiming anything that wasn't already mine, Daniel said. They packed the journals and lantern carefully into a bag Tobias brought. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying a sharper bite. The trees swayed as snow dusted down from heavy branches, whispering across the ground. Tobias locked the shed with the old key and handed it to Daniel. Keep this. It belongs with you now. Daniel took it, feeling the cold metal press into his palm, a symbol of something larger than inheritance, a responsibility, a welcome, a doorway into a life Eleanor believed he still deserved. As they began walking back toward town, Tobias glanced at him. Whatever Travis tries next, he said, remember, you're not alone. The town knows what Eleanor wanted. And what about Travis? Daniel asked. Tobias gave a grim smile. He's always wanted something that didn't belong to him, but wanting ain't the same as deserving. Daniel nodded. Max trotted ahead of them, tail high, footprints marking a surer path through the untouched snow. For the first time, Daniel felt not only hope, but belonging. The lodge, the lake, and even the quiet woods were beginning to feel like they recognized him. And he wasn't leaving without fighting for what Eleanor trusted him to carry forward. The next morning arrived with a bitter wind sweeping across Lake Willoughby, pushing snow in spiraling sheets that made the world appear half erased. Daniel stood beneath the rear eaves of the lodge with Tobias, inspecting the sagging beams Eleanor had always meant to reinforce. Frost dusted the edge of the roof, catching in Tobias's beard as he spoke. She worried this part would give out one winter, Tobias said, tapping a wooden post with the blunt end of his glove. Told me she hoped you'd fix it someday. Said you always had patient hands. Daniel gave a quiet, uncertain laugh. Not sure she'd say that if she saw me trying to build anything now. She would, Tobias said with certainty. Because she didn't care about the wood, she cared about the man holding it. Max sniffed along the snow-packed ground, tail raised with curiosity. The lake wind teased snow into small clouds around his paws. The morning felt calm. Too calm, in a way Daniel had learned to distrust. A crunch of footsteps broke the stillness. They turned as Travis emerged from the tree line, hands in his pockets, boots cutting careless tracks through untouched snow. He wore a heavy parka, fur-lined hood down, revealing windswept sandy hair and a smirk that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. Well, well, Travis called, voice edged with mock cheer. Didn't expect to find the welcome committee out here fixing up my place. Tobias muttered something under his breath, but Daniel stepped forward, measured and steady. It's not your place, Travis. The will is clear. Lawyers decide that, not you. Travis stopped a few feet away, gaze flicking between Daniel and the shed they had inspected the day before. You sure seem awfully comfortable strolling around property that's still in dispute. Max growled low, stepping slightly in front of Daniel. Travis's eyes narrowed. Still dragging that mud around? Heard those dogs are good at sniffing out threats. Shame they can't sniff out common sense. Daniel ignored the bait, but Travis wasn't finished. You know, he said casually, folks in town used to talk about you. The quiet soldier with the broken sleep. The one who jumped at fireworks on the 4th of July. Always wondered why Eleanor poured so much love into someone who came back. Damaged. The words hit with quiet precision, sharper than shouting ever could. Daniel's jaw worked, his pulse beginning to thrum at his temples. Tobias stepped forward, voice low. Enough, Travis. But Travis only shrugged and circled slightly, as though examining Daniel like an unstable structure about to give way. Don't get me wrong, he continued. I know you think you're hiding it, but people like you... He clicked his tongue mockingly. One little shove and you snap. Then, as if to prove his point, Travis stepped closer and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Not forceful, but deliberate. A boundary violation done with a smile. See? Travis murmured, already shaking. Daniel wasn't shaking. He was holding still, too still, as old reflexes rippled beneath his ribs. Breathing grew thin, the world tightening. The touch on his shoulder became a memory overlay. Dust exploding around him, someone grabbing him before the blast, the smell of metal and sand. Max barked sharply, snapping him back. Don't touch me, Daniel warned quietly. Travis leaned in. Or what? You gonna hit me? Give me the show Daniel didn't hit him. He simply pushed Travis's forearm aside, firm and quick, wanting space. It was enough. Travis let himself fall backward into a drift of snow, with theatrical exaggeration, arms flailing as he cried out, Hey! He attacked me! Tobias! You saw it! This man's unstable! Daniel stood frozen, dread and frustration flaring at once. Tobias cursed under his breath. Within minutes, flashing lights pierced the trees. A sheriff's truck crunched up the snowy drive, tires grinding through fresh powder. Sheriff Raymond Holt stepped out. A broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with peppered hair, deep-set eyes, and a face carved by decades of winter patrols. His expression was calm, measured, but Daniel recognized the instinctive caution in his gaze, the same caution people often carried when handed a story about a veteran losing control. Holt addressed them all. Morning, folks. Got a report of an altercation. Travis sprang to his feet in a righteous huff. Sheriff, I was just checking perimeter when he, pointing dramatically at Daniel, shoved me to the ground, completely unprovoked. I'm managing this place legally, and he's trespassing. That's not what happened, Tobias said sharply. He baited Daniel, got in his space. Holt raised a hand. One at a time. Daniel took a breath, forcing steadiness into his voice. Sheriff, I didn't attack him. He put his hand on me. I pushed it away. That's all. Travis scoffed. Look at him shaking. He's barely holding it together. Daniel wasn't shaking now, but Holt's eyes lingered on him with a softness that came from experience, not judgment. The sheriff himself carried a subtle limp, maybe from an old injury. He carried himself like someone who had seen enough to understand how quickly situations could be twisted. Everyone calm down, Holt said. No one's injured. I'm filing this as a disturbance, nothing more. But Daniel... He met Daniel's gaze with firm empathy. Until the estate is settled, tensions are going to run high. Don't give him anything he can use. I didn't, Daniel insisted. I believe you, Holt said quietly. But belief doesn't write reports. Behavior does. A weight settled in Daniel's chest. Not guilt, but the familiar fear that others would see him as unstable, unpredictable. Exactly what Travis all wanted. Holt stepped back toward his truck. Weather's turning nasty, nor'easter rolling in tonight. All of you, stay indoors and stay civil. Last thing we need is a rescue call because someone froze trying to keep a feud alive. As he drove away, Travis shot Daniel a victorious smirk. Careful, cousin. Paper trails are dangerous for guys with your background. Then he walked off, hands in pockets, whistling like a man who had won something. Silence hung in the frigid air. Tobias muttered, "Man's toxic as kerosene." Daniel crouched beside Max, running a hand down the dog's neck. Max pressed close, warm and steady, his silent anchor. "I'm okay," Daniel whispered, though his chest felt tight. "I'm okay." But Tobias saw the hurt beneath the composure. "He picked your softest place and poked it with a stick," he said gently. "That's who he is. But you didn't lose your temper. That's what matters." Daniel nodded, grateful for the words he couldn't form. As dusk crept across the lake, the sky bruised to deep violet. Wind rose in fierce spirals, carrying fine needles of snow. The nor'easter built itself in the distance with low, rolling thunder that didn't belong to summer storms. Every creaking branch, every gust against the lodge felt like a warning. Inside the lodge, lanterns flickered. Outside, the forest bent beneath the mounting storm. Daniel looked out at the white horizon. Max pressed against his leg. Another battle was coming, but at least this time, he wasn't facing it alone. The nor'easter struck with a fury that shook the pines lining Lake Willoughby. By nightfall, the wind roared across the frozen water like a creature determined to tear its way inland. Snow blew sideways, clinging to windows, burying fences, swallowing tracks faster than they could be made. Daniel and Max took shelter in the cabin's living room, lanterns glowing softly as the fire popped in the hearth. Tobias had returned home earlier to secure his workshop, promising to check in by morning. The storm deepened until the world outside dissolved into a white void. Daniel felt it in his chest, the same coiled tension he used to feel before night operations overseas. The pressure in the air, the electric stillness, the sense that something was shifting just out of sight. Max lifted his head suddenly, ears sharp. A faint sound threaded its way through the wind, muffled, irregular. Daniel rose. "You hear that too?" Max barked once, urgent. He paced toward the door, tail stiff, body alert. The sound came again, a distant yell swept up by the storm. Daniel grabbed his coat, boots, and flashlight. "Let's check it out." He stepped outside into a battering gust that stole his breath. Snow struck his face like grains of sand. Max pushed forward, guiding him down the slope toward the lodge's main building, where Travis had been staying. Lights flickered behind the frosted windows. The roof groaned beneath the weight of ice. Then came a crack, sharp as a rifle shot. The old timber above the west side of the lodge split with a splintering roar. A section of the roof collapsed inward, sending snow and debris spilling into the hall. Daniel flinched, heart jolting. Someone screamed for help. Daniel ran. Near the entrance, Travis stumbled out into the storm, face pale beneath the glow of a flashlight. He looked shaken, hair matted with snow, breath fogging in frantic bursts. He had always carried an air of swagger, but now he seemed stripped of certainty, adrenaline making his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Daniel!" Travis shouted over the wind. "There's people inside. 3 hikers. They showed up lost an hour ago. I was trying to help. Then the roof." His voice cracked into something raw, helpless panic. Daniel didn't waste time. "Where are they?" "In the hallway, west corner. I couldn't get to them. The beams, everything's blocked. I called for help, but the signal keeps dropping." Daniel pushed past him. "Stay here. Keep shouting so first responders can find the place." Travis nodded, stunned into obedience. Inside, the main hall was half filled with snow and rubble. Broken beams jutted like jagged ribs through the drifts. The wind forced its way through the broken roof, flinging icy mist across the floor. Max darted ahead, nose low, barking sharply toward a narrow pocket where debris had collapsed but not fully sealed. Daniel crouched beside him. "Good boy, show me." Max shoved his body halfway beneath a tilted beam, his bark echoing through the cavity beyond. A woman's voice answered faintly, trembling. "Is someone there?" Daniel's pulse steadied. Training took over, smoothing the chaos. He shone his flashlight into the narrow opening. He could make out 3 figures trapped in a cramped pocket of space formed by fallen beams. One was a young woman with dark braided hair and flushed cheeks, bundled in a green parka, eyes wide with fear but alert. Another was an older man with a gray beard, holding his arm awkwardly against his chest. The third was a teenage boy, shivering violently, face pale. "We're going to get you out," Daniel said firmly. "Is anyone bleeding heavily?" The older man grimaced. "No, just my arm. Think it's twisted." The boy barely spoke. The young woman spoke for him. "He's freezing. We need to move him soon." Daniel nodded. He surveyed the structure, angles, load points, places where shifting one board might bring the whole section down. He recognized patterns the way some men recognized faces. The storm outside howled, forcing wind through the fractured roof, making everything groan. Footsteps rushed in behind him. Sheriff Holt appeared through the flying snow, coat dusted white, radio in hand. Behind him came Deputy Sarah Linden, a woman in her early 30s with windburned cheeks, auburn hair pulled into a messy bun under her cap, and a quiet steadiness in her eyes. Sarah carried herself with a calm intensity, the kind that suggested years of proving herself in small-town emergencies. "What do we have?" Holt asked. "3 trapped," Daniel answered. "Space is stable for now, but we need a controlled exit route. If we lift the wrong beam, the whole corner could pancake." Sarah knelt beside him, flashlight sweeping the debris. "I see it. Rotate the lower brace first, then wedge with a support board." Holt nodded. "I'll radio for a rescue saw. ETA 15 minutes if they can push through the storm." "We don't have 15, Daniel said, glancing at the shivering boy. "Hypothermia is setting in." Together they improvised. Daniel shoved aside lighter boards while Sarah created a makeshift brace using 2 broken planks and a length of fallen molding. Holt stabilized the larger beam with his shoulder, straining against its weight. Max squeezed deeper into the opening, barking rhythmically, his signal training revived. Each burst was sharp, aimed, designed to help disoriented victims locate help. The teenage boy stirred at the sound, eyes refocusing. "That dog's incredible," Sarah murmured. "He's saved me more times than I've saved him," Daniel said. With a coordinated effort, Daniel and Sarah shifted the large beam just enough to widen the gap. Snow poured in around them. Cold bit through gloves. The structure creaked ominously. "Quick," Daniel said. "You first, kid." The teenage boy was pulled through, trembling violently. Sarah wrapped her coat around him and guided him toward the entrance, shouting for blankets. Next came the older man, teeth clenched against pain as Holt helped him out. The young woman remained, a beam pinned part of her coat. Daniel reached in, slicing the fabric with his pocket knife and guiding her out carefully. When she stumbled free, she clutched Daniel's arm. "Thank you, thank you." Before he could answer, a heavy groan shook the entire corner. "Move!" Sarah yelled. They leaped back as the remaining structure collapsed inward with a deafening crash, filling the space where the hikers had been moments earlier. Breathing hard, Daniel steadied himself. Max pressed close to his leg, tail wagging once as if confirming, mission accomplished. Outside, the wind screamed across the porch. First responders arrived, volunteers from town, bundled against the storm, carrying blankets, thermoses, and medical kits. The hikers were rushed into warm vehicles. Word spread fast, as it always did in winter towns. Holt clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "If you hadn't heard their voices, if you hadn't gone in," he shook his head, "we'd be writing a very different report." Sarah added softly, "You led that rescue like someone who's done it 100 times. Daniel swallowed. "I just did what anyone would have done." Tobias approached through the storm, eyes wide. "Daniel, the whole town's talking. You pulled 3 people out of a collapse, in a nor'easter." But Daniel wasn't thinking of praise. He was thinking of how close everything had been to ending differently, of Max's bark echoing through broken beams, of the way Eleanor had always said, winter tested character more than any season. Behind them, Travis lingered near the porch, looking small beneath the storm, uncertainty etched across his face. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time, Daniel saw something other than cruelty in him. Fear, perhaps, or the realization he'd been standing on the sidelines while someone else acted. Whether that would change him remained to be seen. As the storm raged on, Daniel felt something shift. Not in the weather, but in the way people looked at him. Not with suspicion, not with hesitation, but with quiet, emerging trust. For the first time, Westmore saw him not as the veteran with ghosts, but as the man who stepped into collapsing buildings during blizzards. The lodge lights flickered against the snow, glowing like a beacon. And in the heart of a storm fierce enough to level roofs, Daniel realized something profound. Eleanor had known who he could become long before he did. The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in a brittle cold that clung to everything. The windows of Daniel's borrowed truck, the steps leading up to the county courthouse, even the very breath that left his lungs. The storm from the previous night had quieted into a pale stillness, leaving the town of Westmore washed clean beneath a layer of fresh snow. But inside Daniel's chest, another storm stirred, one made not of wind and ice, but of memory, tight breaths, and the kind of tension only enclosed spaces could summon. The county courthouse was modest, a brick building from the 1960s with narrow hallways, humming radiators, and wood-paneled walls that carried the scent of dust and old paper. It wasn't a place built for grandeur, just a place to settle disputes in a town too small for anything more complicated. Yet today it felt larger, heavier, as if every corner held a whisper from a past Daniel wished he could leave buried. Max walked at his side, tail lowered, gaze sweeping the room. The 5-year-old German shepherd moved with quiet assurance, his paws making soft clicks on the linoleum floor. His sable coat shimmered under the fluorescent lights, and the familiar way he leaned into Daniel's leg felt like an anchor dropped into turbulent waters. "You're all right," Daniel murmured, though the words were meant for himself. Max nudged his knee gently. Inside the courtroom, only a handful of people were present. A clerk arranging files, Travis's attorney, a short, nervous man in a charcoal suit, a forensic handwriting examiner setting up equipment near the judge's bench, and Lydia Grant, Daniel's attorney, standing near the table with the calm precision of someone who had seen every kind of dispute this county could offer. Lydia was in her early 40s, tall and composed, with dark coils of hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. Her skin held the warm tone of polished walnut, and she wore thin-frame glasses that gave her a focused, almost surgical air. Her voice was low, level, and carried the weight of someone who understood not only the law, but the quiet grief that often brought people to it. She greeted Daniel with a nod that was both reassuring and steady. "You made it," she said softly. "Take your time, settling in." Daniel exhaled, scanning the tight space. The ceiling felt too low, the hum of the radiator too loud. He chose a seat with his back to the wall, an instinct, not a decision, and Max curled at his feet, watchful. Travis entered moments later. His cousin looked thinner than before, cheeks hollowed, dark circles smudged beneath his eyes. His once carefully styled hair hung limp under a knit cap, and his parka was zipped all the way to his chin as if he needed armor. Guilt and desperation clung to him like smoke. When he caught sight of Daniel, his expression flickered. Anger, fear, maybe shame. But he said nothing. Judge Maren Caldwell entered the room with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 30 years listening to the problems of others. She was in her late 60s, her white hair pulled into a bun, her gaze sharp but not unkind. A Vermont-born judge through and through, pragmatic, perceptive, and allergic to theatrics. "Let's begin," she said, settling behind the bench. "We're here to determine rightful ownership of the Whitmore property on Lake Willoughby. Counselors, proceed." Travis's attorney moved first, his voice thin and hurried as he presented a document claiming to be a revised will from Eleanor Whitmore, signed 3 months before her passing. Travis sat rigidly beside him, jaw clenched. But the moment the document was set on the judge's desk, Lydia lifted one calm hand. "Your Honor, we would like to call the forensic handwriting examiner." The examiner, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Helen Foster, with sharp features and hair swept into a loose bun, approached with a binder of comparison samples. Her voice was crisp. I've compared the signature on this alleged updated will with verified signatures from Miss Whitmore spanning the last 12 years. The pressure pattern, slant, and baseline alignment differ significantly. This signature is not genuine. A hush fell over the room. Daniel didn't look at Travis, but he felt the shift beside him, the way Travis exhaled sharply, staring at the floor. Judge Caldwell raised a brow. Not genuine, as in fraudulent? Yes, Your Honor, consistent with tracing or imitation. The judge let the words settle like falling snow. Lydia stepped forward, her tone steady. We would also like to submit Miss Whitmore's operational logbook, found in her storage cabin, confirming her intent for Mr. Daniel Brooks to inherit the lodge, along with the testimony of Mr. Tobias Green, who assisted Miss Whitmore for over 15 years. Tobias was called forward. The older man walked with a slight limp, an old injury from logging days, but his eyes shone with sincerity. His beard, streaked with silver, matched the snowy morning outside. Eleanor talked about Daniel often, Tobias said he was the only one who wrote back, said he was family by choice, not blood. She told me, years ago, that the lodge was meant for him when the time came. Lydia added, we are also submitting photographs taken the week before the dispute began, photos showing Mr. Travis Brooks removing antique equipment, furniture, and tools from the premises without permission. The judge flipped through the photos. In one, Travis loaded crates into the back of a truck. In another, he carried out a vintage canoe paddle, one Eleanor had mentioned in her letters. Travis's face drained of color. And last, Lydia said, placing several receipts on the table, records from local pawn shops and online listings showing these items being sold. Silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Daniel's breathing steadied. Max placed a paw on his boot, offering reassurance without a sound. Finally, Judge Caldwell leaned back, gaze fixed on Travis. Mr. Brooks, do you have anything you wish to say? For the first time that morning, Travis spoke, not with defiance, but with exhaustion. I needed the money, he said, voice cracking. I thought, if I could get the place first, maybe I could fix things. I didn't mean... His breath shook. But I did what I did. The judge nodded slowly, absorbing not just the words, but the defeat behind them. She lifted her gavel. The court rules in favor of Mr. Daniel Brooks as the sole rightful heir and legal owner of the Whitmore Lodge. Effective immediately, Mr. Travis Brooks is prohibited from entering or interfering with the property. The gavel struck wood, one clear, echoing knock that settled the matter forever. Daniel felt something unclench inside him. Not triumph, not victory, just release. Outside the courthouse, the sky held a pale winter sun, a thin gold streak fighting through the clouds. Travis stood on the steps, snow landing on his shoulders like fragile confessions. His anger seemed gone. In its place was a heaviness Daniel recognized too well. I'm out of road, Travis said quietly, eyes unfocused. I don't have anything left to fix this. Daniel didn't know what to say. Some wounds couldn't be talked away. Some lessons only arrived at the edge of collapse, like roofs in storms, like lives mismanaged too long. Max nudged Daniel's hand, grounding him again. For the first time since his return, Daniel felt the path ahead grow just a little clearer. Not easy, not guaranteed, but his. The first morning, Daniel returned to the lodge as its rightful owner was quiet in the way only deep winter could be. Soft, crystalline, almost reverent. The sunlight touched the frosted windows with a pale gold shimmer, and thin plumes of smoke curled from the chimney as if the house itself had begun to breathe again. Lake Willoughby lay frozen in the distance, the ice catching the dawn like hammered silver beneath a sky washed clean by the storm. Daniel stood on the porch with Max beside him, the dog's breath puffing into white clouds. The house needed repairs everywhere, loose siding, warped porch boards, a sagging beam on the west side of the roof. But for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt present, ready, grounded by the scent of pine, the creak of snow beneath his boots, and the steady companionship of the dog, who watched him with calm, amber eyes. "Looks like we've got work to do," Daniel said softly. Max barked once, sharp, enthusiastic, a clear vote of agreement. He bounded into the yard, nose to the snow, patrolling like a self-appointed guardian of the property. His sable coat looked warm against the white landscape, and the slight bend of his left ear made him appear perpetually curious. Daniel smiled at the sight. Inside, the main room of the lodge was still filled with dust, old furniture, and the faint smell of cedar that clung to every beam. But when he walked through it, he could almost hear Eleanor humming as she once did. Picture her brushing snow off her coat after coming in from the porch, setting the kettle on the stove, writing her gentle letters. He touched one hand to the wooden post at the corner of the living room, solid, warm from the fire, like greeting an old friend. Before long, the quiet morning gave way to the sound of approaching footsteps. Carol arrived first, carrying a basket of freshly baked cinnamon rolls. She was wrapped in a wool coat the color of cream, her gray hair tucked beneath a knitted hat. Deep smile lines framed her eyes, giving her a look of perpetual kindness. "Thought you could use something warm," she said, pushing the basket into Daniel's hands before he could protest. "A house wakes up better when it smells like baking." Daniel thanked her with more sincerity than he'd expected. Carol had the kind of presence that softened sharp edges. Next came Tobias, lumbering up the slope with a toolbox slung over his shoulder. The man's heavy winter jacket strained slightly at his broad shoulders, and the wind turned his beard into stiff silver bristles. But his blue eyes held the same steady friendliness Daniel had grown to appreciate. "Roof sagging on the east side," Tobias said, tapping his boot against a support beam. "Lucky the whole thing didn't cave in with the storm. Let's patch it before the next one hits." Daniel nodded gratefully. He picked up the spare hammer Eleanor had left in the shed, its wooden handle worn smooth. And then came more footsteps, quieter, hesitant. Two veterans from the local support group Tobias attended approached the lodge, bundled in mismatched coats and scarves. One was a tall black man named Robert, with soft brown eyes and a limp from an old hip injury. The other, Mateo, was shorter, with olive skin and a dark beard that hid a nervous smile. "We heard you were rebuilding," Robert said. "Tobias mentioned you could use hands." Daniel studied them briefly, men marked by experience, carrying their own quiet storms. He saw the familiar tightness in their posture, the guardedness behind their voices, and he recognized it with a kind of kinship. "I'd appreciate it," Daniel said. They joined the work without hesitation. By midday, the lodge buzzed with the rhythm of restoration, hammering, scraping, clearing, sweeping. Daniel climbed ladders, sanded window frames, measured boards, sealed cracks. Max supervised each task with earnest concentration, trotting from one worker to another, sniffing tools and nudging pockets for treats. Inside the warmth of the lodge, laughter gradually replaced the quiet. Carol brewed tea for everyone, her presence stitching comfort into the air like a familiar song. She moved between workers with an easy grace, offering encouragement, occasionally fussing over someone who looked too cold or too tired. The afternoon sun drifted toward a softer gold, casting elongated shadows across the yard. It was then, while Daniel repaired a window hinge, that Tobias approached with a hesitant expression. "There's someone asking for you," Tobias said quietly. "Down by the dock." Daniel tensed, not out of anger, but out of something more complicated. He followed Tobias through the drifted snow toward the lake shore, where a single figure stood near the frozen water. Travis. He looked smaller than before, shoulders hunched inside his worn parka. His hair was windblown, and his hands were buried deep in his pockets. There was no swagger this time, no bitterness twisting his expression, only fatigue, and something like regret. "I heard you won the case," Travis said, voice low. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm just here because I don't know where else to go." Daniel studied him. The hollowness in Travis's eyes wasn't the emptiness of defeat. It was the emptiness of someone who had run out of ways to lie to himself. "You hurt people," Daniel said plainly. "You hurt me, and you tried to take something that wasn't yours." "I know. Travis looked away. I've got debts, bad ones, and I made worse choices trying to fix them. I kept thinking if I took the lodge first, I could sell it, pay everyone back, and start over. But that's not how starting over works. I see that now. A long silence settled between them, broken only by the soft whisper of wind over the ice. Daniel exhaled slowly. His breath curled into the cold like a pale ribbon. You want help? Daniel said, not a question. Travis swallowed hard. I want a chance. I want to stop being the person who ruins everything. Max padded forward, stopping beside Daniel. The dog watched Travis closely, not aggressively, just discerningly, as if weighing the truth behind the man's words. Daniel finally spoke. If you're willing to work, really work, there's room here. I'm turning the lodge into a retreat for veterans dealing with PTSD. A place to reset, to breathe. You can help build it, maintain it, keep the grounds. You'll earn what you get. No cutting corners, no schemes. Travis's eyes stung with sudden gratitude. Are you sure? He whispered. No, Daniel said honestly, but I'm willing. The wind shifted gently, brushing both men like a quiet benediction. By evening, the lodge brimmed with new life. Robert and Mateo had managed to repair the wooden footbridge that led to the lake. Carol hummed softly as she set out bowls of stew. Tobias sharpened tools beside the fire pit. And in the very center of it all, Max lay with his head on Daniel's boot, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. That night, Daniel lit a lantern and placed it on the porch, one Eleanor used to call her Winter Beacon. The warm glow shone across the snow, reaching toward the lake, the woods, the road, toward anyone still searching for a way home. Around the crackling fire, laughter mingled with the hiss of burning logs. Travis sat slightly apart from the others at first, but gradually the distance closed. Someone handed him a cup of hot cider. Someone else offered a spare pair of gloves. No one spoke of the past. They simply made room. Max lifted his head, watching the rising sparks drift like tiny stars into the deep Vermont night. Daniel followed the dog's gaze and felt something settle inside him. Not triumph, not closure, but peace. A lodge revived, a community mended, a man learning to breathe again, and a winter that no longer felt like a weight, but a beginning. When winter finally loosened its grip on Lake Willoughby, the lodge stood not just restored, but renewed, its warm glow reflecting across the frozen water like a promise kept. Daniel often paused on the porch at dusk, watching veterans gather by the fire, hearing their laughter rise into the cold evening air. He saw Travis learning to rebuild more than a roof. He saw Robert's limp ease as community gave him purpose again. He saw Mateo smile without apology. And he felt Max lean against his leg, steady as the heartbeat of a home rediscovered. In that quiet place, Daniel understood something Eleanor had always tried to remind him. Healing didn't arrive as a thunderclap, but as a lantern, small, steady, carried by many hands. A town showed up. Strangers became brothers. And from one act of generosity, a life cracked open toward hope. Some miracles don't split the sky. They appear in the people who refuse to give up on you. And maybe, just maybe, God sends those people at the exact moment we need them most. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to leave a prayer. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And subscribe to support more stories of faith, healing, and second chances. May God bless you and your family with warmth, protection, and peace.